Today's session is your RIP working hard enough? It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today, Ellie Klutz, Senior Product Marketing Manager for Fiery Wide Format, and John Nate, Educational Architect and Trainer for Fiery Wide Format. Ellie and John have prepared a great presentation, and it is my pleasure to hand off to Ellie to get us going. Ellie, take it away.
Thank you, Yael. Today's session will be a little bit different compared to other sessions we've done in this series. Today we'll focus more on how to work smarter and how to get more out of your Fiery Pro server or your Fiery XF. The collection of best practices and tips that John will explain are focused on how to make your day-to-day production easier and faster, and these best practices should be usable for new users and also for our long-term users. But a little warning for the new users on the call, the session will go quite fast and can jump a little bit between different parts of the user interface. If you feel at any time that it goes too fast for you, don't worry. We will be sharing a number of resources at the end of the session that will help understand these best practices better. We will also be recording, as Yael already said, so you can still watch it again and go back to certain areas that were more interesting for you and that you would like to put in practice. Today's session is best tips and best practices around 4 key areas. We've got parts around automation, very important to make everything streamlined and go faster, usability, color and color management, and integration. More specifically, after this session, you will be able to simplify your system by using presets and workspaces. So that enables a certain level of automation. It avoids clicks and manual work, which always reduces the number of mistakes a human can make. You'll also be able to utilize more of your available color by using the dynamic rendering intent. And then you'll also learn more about the dynamic wedge and how to how process monitoring will help, for example, to hit brand colors better or spot colors better. Controlling user access using hot folders and the UniDriver will then again give you a more streamlined way of working with more automation possibilities and less errors. And last but not least, we'll also talk about IP connectivity and explain the value of this, while John will be showing how this allows a better integration and what you can do with that. So as you can see, we've got quite a long list to cover today, but before we jump in, we do have a couple of questions for you. So we'd like to take a poll, and I'll open the poll now. If you could answer these questions, I'll leave it open for a little bit, and then we'll come back to these a little bit later. So let's get started with our session, Is Your RIP Working Hard Enough? John, all yours.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Thank you, Yael, and thanks everyone for joining us again today for one of our World of Fiery Wide Format webinars. As Ellie mentioned, today I'm going to be really concentrating on 4 areas that what we're looking for is for these to simplify your life. Now, simplify your life can take many ideas and put them into play. We're looking at making the system more streamlined, easier to use, also bringing in, maybe some safety things, making sure that your users aren't given access to areas that they maybe aren't trained yet in how to use, and therefore might run into problems with not getting perhaps the correct color that they want on the output. We are going to focus on the 4 areas, as Ellie said: automation, usability, color, and integration. We're going to start with covering automation. So automation is making your RIP do its own work. So rather than you having to handle every single job, every step along the way, being able to automate the system as little or as much as you need in order to get the work out in a more timely manner, again, without as much human interaction, and to hopefully reduce the errors and remakes that are needed. Now, we have many levels of automation and control that we can incorporate in Fiery ProServer and Fiery XF. At the very basic level, we have hot folders. I'm going to go through each of these in detail, how you would work each of these into your system and how you would set them all up. So we're going to start with hot folders in just a bit. And hot folders is basically a way of, well, kind of automating the way files just come into your Fiery ProServer, Fiery XF system. Next up is the Unidriver. Now, the difference between the Unidriver and the hot folder is that the hot folder gives your users no access to really any of the controls, any of the configured features of your Fiery ProServer, Fiery XF. Unidriver takes it one step higher and allows your users some interaction with client, doesn't give them the client interface, but it allows them to override some of the default settings, gives them a little bit of control. Next up, we're going to take a look at presets. Now, presets allow you to kind of combine commonly used settings into one selectable item. Okay, and you'll see this in the interface in a bit, but the name of this group of settings, you can give a very, very common name that your users will be able to very easily recognize. And again, can help eliminate mistakes along the way. Now, presets can also work with the Unidriver, but presets can also work in the client itself. And also in the client, we can add what are called workspaces. Workspaces, a lot of people don't know about workspaces, but it can really help you customize the Fiery ProServer, Fiery XF client interface. And this is on a per-user level, limiting access to certain features for certain employees, certain staff members, either as a way of keeping them away from things that they aren't trained on how to use, or just getting things out of the way. You know, if I don't have any cutters, well, maybe I'll just get rid of that cutting panel and it's not in the way. I don't see it. I don't have to worry about it. And I can just concentrate on the areas of the interface that really impact me. And finally, we do have the full client, but the full client, you can also have presets and workspaces. So from the bottom level of hot folders all the way up to the full client, and really you can add workspaces and presets there too. So we're going to start with looking at hot folders. Now, hot folders gives the untrained users access to your RIP. Okay, they don't have to say, okay, I put those files in that folder for you to process. Oh, here's a jump drive with the files on them. Can you process them? They can get the ball rolling by getting the files into your system all on their own. So it eliminates that interaction of the staff. Now, you can use either local or remote hot folders. Okay, the local folder right on the hard drive where Fiery ProServer or Fiery XF server is installed, or it can be anywhere in the network that you can navigate to from the server portion of the software. One little side note, Fiery ProServer, Fiery XF, for the use of hot folders, does not support mapped drives. If you're not sure what mapped drives are, hey, that's what Google is for. We won't get into that right now, or your IT department, I'm sure, will be well-versed in what mapped drives are. So if they're setting up the remote folder, just stay away from what we call mapped drives. Well, let's take a look in the XF interface and see how this would work. I've got my Fiery client launched here, and I've got one of my workflows selected. And if I go to the File panel, under Job Detection, this is our hot folder section. And you notice it's grayed out. This is a very, very common call to support is, hey, I want to set up a hot folder here, but this is grayed out. What's going on? Well, in order to enable the access to the hot folder feature, you have to deactivate the input side of the workflow that you're setting up the hot folder for. And to do that, I just click left mouse once on the little green arrow to turn it to a little red square. In the world of Fiery ProServer and Fiery XF, green means go, and red is, well, it means stop. It's kind of like a little stop sign. So once that is deactivated, now you can see that this is actually no longer grayed out. And I can click on the Choose button, and then I can go out, and I'm just going to grab my local disk here. I'm going to make a new folder. I can make a new folder from right here, and I will call it Grackle. And select it. And now you can see that I have that folder selected, and if I reinitialize, turn on the input side of the workflow, that hot folder is now active. Now, any job that would fall into that folder, a supported file type, which would be a TIFF, a JPEG, a GIF file, or the more common PostScript and the most common PDF files, any of those supported files that would be dropped into that hot folder, Fiery Pro Server, Fiery XF, for this workflow would automatically pick up that job and process it. Now, because I've got green arrows all the way through, it would actually process it and send it all the way off to my printer. Recently, the hot folder has also become a hyperlink. I can click on that and actually open up the folder and see. As you can see, I don't have any jobs in that folder, but if I did, I could see what they were. So if a user says, hey, I dropped that file in the hot folder, what's going on with it? And you say, well, I don't see it in the interface anywhere. When I go to the Job Explorer, you can click on that link to the hot folder, open it up and see, is it actually there? Maybe it's the wrong file type. Maybe they dropped in a PowerPoint file or a Word document or something thinking it was a graphic file. So very useful hot folders. Remember, turn off the input side, deactivate it, click the little green arrow to turn to a red square in order to be able to activate and grab the or be able to click on the Choose button to grab the folder that you want to use for the hot folder. Okay? Now, what if we want to go a little farther than just the hot folder? There's an issue here also that if your users want to make use of each of these workflows, you have to set up a hot folder for each of them. So here's the Grackle workflow. Here I've got my FOGRA workflow. There's my FOGRA hot folder. And production, I don't have a hot folder for production yet, so they wouldn't be able to drop files into a folder and have my production workflow automatically pick up that file. So we can instead do something called the Unidriver. So the Unidriver is a piece of software that you would install. It's on the installation DVD. You can also go up to the website and get the Unidriver. But the Unidriver can be installed on each of your artists, each of your production people's computer, and it's only installed once. Now, it gives them limited access to the RIP features, and it's somewhere between the hot folders and the full client. So let's take a look at that. How does that work? I've got a document opened here in Illustrator. And if I select File Print, we would get the normal print dialog box that comes up. Now, this interface will change because the print interface changes based on what application you're using and whether you're on a Mac or a Windows computer. When you install Fiery XF on your system, you will get, if you install the Unidriver, there will be a PDF document that appears on your desktop that explains how to install the Unidriver on each of your users' computers and then how to configure it or use it. So I've got the print dialog box open and I've got the Unidriver selected and the PPD defaulted to the Unidriver. So I'm going to go into Setup, and in Setup with the Unidriver selected, I'm going to go into Preferences. And I'll click on the Fire Unidriver tab, and I'm going to select Change the Settings. Now, once I change any of my settings, they become default, so I wouldn't have to change them again. And the first thing, since I haven't used this installation before, is I get the traditional login for Fiery XF, Fiery Pro Server Client. So I'm just going to log in as the default admin. And what's happening now is bidirectional communication is being established between my copy of the Unidriver and the Fiery client interface. So first of all, notice under Workflow, I've got all the workflows available. Okay? I didn't have to install the Unidriver 4 times. I just installed it once, and I've now got access to all of these workflows. And in any of them, I can now modify some of the settings. I can change the scaling. I can change rotation, alignment of the job. In color, I can select presets for proofing, for production. Now keep these presets in mind here, so we may come back to this in a little bit. Also, any media sets that are set up, or media size. I can select all of these, and if I check this box once, my settings, now, anything I change here is going to override the default settings for that workflow. So for instance, for the Grackle workflow, it's set to not scale. Well, I could scale to fit the media or a percent or numerically. I could say, well, I want to do this half size. So I just type in 50%, and now this would be printed at 50% without anyone having to modify the job in the Fiery interface itself. Okay? Now, once I've changed those, now these settings are now the default. So the next time I go to print, if I cater through, all I would have to do is select the Unidriver and hit print, and it would print to the Grackle workflow, and it would scale the job to 50%. I only have to go back into the preferences and settings if I want to change any of these defaults. Okay? So that's how the Unidriver works. Very, very handy. It gives your users some control without, again, having to really overrule everything or give them complete training in the Fiery client. All right, again, if you have any questions today, please use the little question and answer window. We will hopefully have time at the end to answer most, if not all, of your questions. I'll be honest, I talk a lot, and we rarely have time for everybody's questions. But as y'all mentioned, we will send out written copies of all the questions and answers to everyone on today's webinar. So if we don't get to your question, you will still see the answer coming your way. Ellie, do we have the poll results?
Yes, we do. They should be coming up now.
Drum roll. Okay. Oh, a lot of you didn't want to answer which of the following you use. A little bit of the Unidriver, some with hot folders, presets and workflows. So not a lot of this kind of automation area set up. So this will be good for everybody to watch, because no matter what printer you're printing to, you can make use of any of these features so far. Do you verify brand colors, so spot colors? Some do, 22 of the 82 do. Again, almost the majority of you, no answer there. We've got a lot of shy people on the webinar today. And finally, question on the ViewTek printer. Again, we've got 20 for no for IP printing, and just a few of you are using IP printing. So the IP printing is going to be at the tail end of today's presentation. So those of you that are running a ViewTek printer, make special note for just the last few minutes of the webinar when I cover IP printing for those particular printers. So thanks everyone for putting in your information into the poll. We appreciate it, and we'll now move on to usability. So usability is using what we call presets and workspaces. And again, this is something that anyone can use with any Pro server or copy of Fiery XF, and it doesn't limit it to any particular printer. So we're going to start with presets, which is quick access to commonly used settings. So go back into our Fiery XF interface, and what I want to call your attention to, I'm going to select this workflow, and I'm going to go over to color. Okay? And you'll notice on the color adjustments, color management, spot colors, there's these little tick marks here. And a lot of people never even notice that these little tick marks are here. But those are the tick marks that show you that you can set up a preset for that particular option. I'm going to go into color management here. And here's my Adobe RGB, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to select Grackle for my profile, and I'll turn off the dynamic rendering intent. I'll cover that a little later. And for the simulation profile, I'm also going to set my Grackle 2013. So let's say this is my setting I'm going to use for proofing for Grackle. I can click on this little drop-down and click Save as Preset, and a little dialog box comes up where I give it a name, and I will call it Grackle. And okay, so these are my settings that I want to use if any of my staff members are printing a job for setting for Grackle. Now, the beauty of this is if we change this, this is going to be ECI, and this is changed from absolute colorimetric to perceptual absolute, okay? And we make those changes. Well, notice there's nothing up here, so I know this is not configured for my Grackle setup. All I have to do is click here, select Grackle, and now this is back to absolute colorimetric, and we're back to Grackle and Adobe RGB. So again, it's a quick way of letting you know that you're configured properly. I've got Grackle right here. You could also use these presets on a per job basis. Okay, if you're in the Job Explorer and a job is in, you can go to the color management and select the Grackle and maybe override any of the settings that were currently in that workflow. Now we can also do this on the output device. On the output device, under print configuration, here is a particular setting. I can save this as a preset, and let's say this is gloss banner. And let's say we select a different one. I'm just arbitrarily kind of picking some things here and save as preset, and this is going to be Tyvek. Well, I know I'm currently configured, and look at this. I might not know what the heck this means or any of this stuff, but as a user that has been somewhat trained on the system, I know whether this is supposed to be printed on Tyvek or gloss banner. So I don't have to look at some chart and see what calibration set am I supposed to use for gloss banner. Okay, I can just select it off the list and very quickly have it configured, and I'm now all ready to go. Okay, I want to take one moment and go back into Illustrator here. And, actually, no, I'll come back. I'll do one more thing before I come back in here. I want to go into what we call workspaces first, okay, and then I'll cover both of these in the unit driver again. So workspaces allow you to customize the interface. It helps you improve efficiency and safety or security, depending upon how you want to define it. So we'll go back into our Fiery interface, and Workspaces is this little menu item up here. I'll go to Workspaces, Workspaces, and go into the Workspace Manager. So I'm going to make a new user here. Let's call this new user John. Okay, and for John, well, John, I'm only going to allow access to work on specific jobs. So I'm not going to make John an administrator. I can set what John is going to be able to see in the Job Explorer and the System Manager. This is the System Manager here you see behind this window. But because I'm going to make John a user and not an administrator, then he's not going to be able to get to the System Manager at all. So I don't have to worry about this. But I could configure this just as easily as I'm going to configure the Job Explorer. So let's take a look. I can turn on or off any of these individual panes and subpanes. So source information, sure. Warnings, yeah, we'll do that. I don't want John to have access to any of this layout. The sheet size, yes. Nesting, step and repeat, nope. John, we haven't trained him on any of this. Finishing, no, we don't have to worry about that. Color, John, no, he hasn't been taught anything about color management yet. I'll let him set the print settings, the media size, but everything else will turn off here. And finally, because we haven't taught him about color management, he doesn't know how to verify, so we'll turn that off. And then, of course, the system. And then I can apply. So I've got this set for John. Okay, I'm going to add a new user. And I'll make the new user John. Give John a password. And I'm going to make John a user. And under Workspaces here, I'm going to turn on John and turn off full. Now I could have multiple workflows here. So you could configure this. Let's say you have two workflows for any one particular staff member, one for production and one for proofing. So in proofing, you might have the verification panel turned on. For production, you may have the cutting panel turned on. So you can really configure this so that your user can easily switch back and forth to what they want to work on. But for right now, we're kind of looking at more of a safety security issue. I'm going to connect John to just the Grackle workflow. Okay, and click Save. Now, if I go over to the Job Explorer, I am going to take a look at the interface here. And if you see, we've got all of these options. We've also got a number of jobs. that are in. And I was not connected to this output device, so that's why the error comes in. But I am going to make believe for the moment that we're actually using the John interface. Now look, I've got hardly any options over here, and under File I've only got the 2, Layout I've only got the 2, and Output I've only got the 2. So I've really changed the configuration of what can be done here. Also, if I go to import a job, I would only be able to import it into the Grackle workflow because that is the only workflow that John is connected to. I'm going to go back out into Adobe Illustrator and go into the print dialog box again. And once the print dialog box comes in, I'm going to change it a bit here and go into Setup. And again, my unit driver. I'm going to change the settings. But just like the client, I'm still logged in as the administrator. And see, I've got all of these options. So I'm going to say Connect. And I'm going to connect now instead as this new user, John. So I'll connect as John and connect. So this is how I would set up UniDriver on John's workstation that he is working on. We're reconnecting. Now notice under Workflows, all I've got is Grackle. John can only print from his application, InDesign, Illustrator, Photoshop, and he can only send files into the Grackle workflow. Also under Color, notice there's my Grackle preset that I've built. So any of the presets that you build will automatically be sent over the network into the copies of the UniDriver. And once they're launched, your users will have access to any of those appropriate presets. So the presets and, to some extent, the workflows can also be useful over in the UniDriver. Okay? Let's now move on and talk a little bit about color. Okay? So color, we talk about, is your RIP working hard enough, which basically means if your RIP's not working hard enough, you're working too hard. And boy, color is one of those areas where, yeah, your RIP may not be working hard enough. Okay? We're talking about minimizing trial and error, and problems with color usually come down to problems that cost you money. Because you notice the problem with color once you print a job and either your customer has rejected it because they're not happy, well, now you have an upset client, or you look at it and you realize that it's not good, something's wrong, and now you have to reprint it, and you've used expensive media and expensive ink and have to redo the job, and it's costing you time. First of all, you want to make sure calibration, profiling, and color optimization is done correctly. Now, we've got a lot of additional information on how to do this. We've covered calibration, profiling, and color optimization on previous World of Fiery webinars. And again, everybody's going to be getting this presentation as a PDF file that you can download from our website once we post it there after today's webinar. And these are live links where you'll be able to go and take a look at any of these past World of Fiery webinars, the recorded sessions. I cover color management fundamentals. What do I mean by gamut, by profiling, by calibration? What is all of this stuff? And then how to do linearization in Fiery Pro Server and Fiery XF. Linearization is what we call the calibration process in Fiery Pro Server and Fiery XF. So linearization, calibration, kind of one and the same. And then profiling and optimization. Optimization is the process that we have where you can get more accurate color on the output by printing and measuring targets several times, and every time you print it and measure it, the color will get a little more accurate compared to whatever your reference profile is that you have selected, ISO-coded or Fogra 52 or Swap or Grackle. Also at help.efi.com, we have some PDF guides. Printer linearization, again, how to do this calibration in Fiery Pro Server and Fiery XF, and advanced linearization for use with ViewTek and Reggiani printers. Okay? We changed the linearization process, a number of generations ago in the Fiery interface, Fiery XF interface. So the advanced linearization guide takes you through all of the features that are available. Now, good linearization. what are we after here? What we're after is the maximum gamut. We always hear people saying, oh, I've got to calibrate my printer for SWAP or for ISO-coded or for FOGRA 39. No, you don't. What you want to do is you want to calibrate, linearize your printer to give you the best results and the largest gamut. You use color management techniques to limit the gamut to the look and feel of whatever you're trying to match, one of the other specifications, as I said, SWAP, Grackle, FOGRA, ISO. Now, this is a very, very good example of what a good profile looks like. This is a 3D view of an actual ICC profile for an output device, and we're looking at it in the profile viewer that is part of the color profiler option in FireEXF. If you don't have this, most people with Pro servers would have this feature. It is an add-on for FireEXF, so if you don't have it, you may want to contact us or your dealer. But what I want to call your attention to is look at the full size and shape of this image. Every color that you can reproduce is within this oddly shaped diagram. And on the bottom here, it's almost like you're shining a light straight down. This is kind of showing the maximum equation, all the way out to this brilliant, brilliant yellow to your red. So this is kind of the saturated areas. Okay? Now, watch. Watch the size of this, and watch this area when I switch to the next image, which is a demonstration of poor linearization. Let me go back. Notice the outside edge doesn't change much. And people look at this and go, hey, I've still got the same gamut I had before. What happened was they over-limited the inks, okay, especially the total ink coverage. And they completely lost all of the dark shadow color areas of their document. Any of these dark shadow areas, they're gonna just start to get really washed out. But they might look at it and say, hey, look, my gamut is the same. I know I'm saving a bunch of ink, and boy, I haven't hurt my gamut at all. Well, yes, you have. You haven't necessarily hurt saturated colors, but you've hurt dark colors. So you want to use caution whenever you start playing around with trying to save ink. You always want to make sure you examine the profiles that you build in a 3D viewer so that you can make sure that you have not kind of hurt yourself. Okay, so we're going to assume that you've done a good linearization, you've built good ICC profiles, and if needed, you have done an optimization. Well, now we're going to look at rendering intent. Rendering intent, and again, this is covered in one of the fundamental courses or webinars that we've done in the past, but rendering intent deals with colors that are out of gamut. We just looked at what gamut means. Gamut means all the colors you can reproduce. Well, it's not uncommon that you have colors in an image that are outside the gamut of your output device. Take a look at your newspaper. Can you get a really, really bright canary yellow? Brilliant, brilliant yellow on a newsprint? Well, no, you can't. So you would say that color is out of gamut. Well, what happens? How do you print it? Well, rendering intents are kind of mathematical formulas that define how the color will be changed, what color it will become in order to make it reproducible. And what we want to do with our rendering intent is we want to use as much of the gamut as possible. We don't want to do what's called gamut clipping. What happens with gamut clipping is you get gradient areas, especially in saturated colors, and they lose all the shape, all the drawing. So dynamic rendering intent automatically selects between perceptual or relative colorimetric, now without black point compensation, so just keep that in mind. And again, black point compensation is covered in one of the other previous webinars. But let's take a look at rendering intents. Now again, here's a link to the Color Management Fundamentals webinar. If you are just unfamiliar with any of this, you'll be able to click on the link, grab a box of popcorn, and listen in on that past webinar. But this is kind of a top-down view of two gamuts. The outside is my larger gamut. Maybe this is the image from my camera, my digital camera. And inside is the gamut of my output device. This is all the color that I can reproduce. You see, I've got 3 pixels that are plotted that are in gamut, and I've got 3 colors that are out of gamut. So if we zoom in on them, This is the problem area. And let's say this is a gradient. Let's say it is this yellow. Let's say it is yellow, and it's a yellow gradient, a yellow. Maybe it's the feathers on that canary that I was talking about a bit ago. Well, they're out of gamut. What happens? I can't just leave them off. That would just be blank paper. Okay, that's not going to look good. In a situation like this, we would normally want to use perceptual. And in perceptual, everything gets compressed. It's almost like taking this entire large ball of color and just squeezing it until it comes into gamut. So colors that are in gamut get moved out of the way. Colors that are out of gamut are now moved in. But notice the white dots, the final resting place of the pixels, the relationships have stayed the same. Now, that's because perceptual is the correct rendering intent for this particular document. Well, what if I selected colorimetric? Again, often a default rendering intent. Well, in this case, these out-of-gamut pixels all become the same color. They just get compressed to the perimeter, the outside edge, the maximum color I can reproduce, and they all become the same thing. Now all the shape in those feathers in that bird are gone. So that's the incorrect choice. Well, but what happens if you know the image was in a digital camera file and you know, oh, the gamut of those camera files is really big, and I know the gamut of my output device is kind of small, but take a look here. I don't have any out-of-gamut pixels in this particular image. All my pixels are in gamut. Well, here, colorimetric would be the right choice. Okay, watch. Here are my in-gamut colors. Now, watch closely what happens when I switch to colorimetric. Nothing. They stay the same. They don't move. Okay, so I've preserved that gamut. What about if it's the incorrect choice? Well, if I select perceptual, it's going to compress this entire ball anyway, and I'm going to lose. I'm going to throw away color that I did not have to do. Okay? I didn't have to throw away the color. Rendering intents only look at the size and shape of the color space an image is in. Dynamic rendering intent takes a look at the gamut of the image itself. And it doesn't care if it's in a great big color space. If the color space of the image, all the pixels are within the gamut of the output device, or at least the pixels that are out of gamut wouldn't become banded if they move into the gamut of the final color space, it will automatically use colorimetric. And if they're too big, it will use perceptual, okay? So a little checkbox here. If we take a look at our interface, I'm going to select my workflow, go to my color panel, dynamic rendering intent. It's right here. Now notice I've got perceptual, I've got absolute here, I've got saturated, I've got relative colorimetric. When I turn that feature on, these are all grayed out. I can't select them anymore because Fiery ProServer, Fiery XF is automatically selecting them. However, keep in mind, what did I say earlier? Which two rendering intents am I going to switch between? Perceptual and relative colorimetric without black point compensation. So it's, even though this is absolute, it's not going to use absolute. It would use relative colorimetric if it needed to. It would not use saturation. It would use perceptual if it needs to. So just kind of keep that in mind, that it only switches between the two no matter what you have selected when you turn that feature on. Okay. Now, another feature that we have that's another dynamic feature is the dynamic wedge. This is exclusive to Fiery ProServer and Fiery XF RIPs. The dynamic wedge you can select as Control Strip 1. This is for use with Color Verifier. Okay. And you set which device you're going to use to measure, how many colors you want to measure, whether you want to do process and spot, or just process or just spot. And you can still, for Control Strip 2, select one of the traditional color bars from FOGRA or from the ID Alliance. But here's the situation with the dynamic wedge. Here's my standard wedge, and here's my image. Well, let's see here. Where are these blue colors in this image? Well, gosh, I don't have these blue colors. Well, maybe her hair is somewhere in here. Maybe a couple of these greens, these purples. Nope, don't have. And, of course, I have the spot color, too. And the spot color, no, I don't see that spot color on here anywhere. Well, here is the same image set up with the dynamic wedge. What happens when the dynamic wedge is used, the system looks at your document and it pulls the most common colors and builds patches of those colors. So now if I measured this color bar, I'm measuring the actual colors that are in the image itself. And again, I can set a process or spot or both. Now this is becoming very important especially for the FOGRA users that use the new FOGRA specification, which demands that you have to verify the accuracy of your spot colors. In the market that uses more the ID-Alliance wedge, so far that's not mandatory, but that will be coming soon, that spot colors do have to be verified in order to qualify for the newer specifications. Okay. Once you select the dynamic wedge and bring a job in, it will show you the recipes that it's using for each of the patches. But because I said spot color and process, that patch right there is that spot color. Now that makes this patch much easier to read. Otherwise, if I've got a handheld, gosh, I can maybe try to get in here and hope I don't get any of the background or any of the white area, which would mess up the measurement I got for my Pantone color. Okay, you can set the delta E tolerances that you want, and you can see what they're measured and whether it passes or fails. And you can always verify, okay, which means you can take the measurements, improve them just using the measurements and the comparison values to the reference profiles. It'll build a little adjustment file, reprint, and your colors can get even better. So it's a very useful feature, and again, if we go in, you would find it on the Verify panel, and again, it's the first option for Control Strip 1. Control Strip 2 does not have the dynamic wedge available, so it has to be selected at Control Strip 1. You select which device, you select 16, 32, or 64 patches, and again, whether process and spot or spot only and process only. Now, if you select process and spot, spot colors win. So let's say you select 16 colors, and let's say you've got 14 spot colors in the job. Heaven help you, but you've got 14 spot colors in this job. Well, you would have 14 patches then, one spot color each, and there would only be 2 patches left of the most common colors in the image. Okay? So in the case of spot colors and process, spot colors win. Now let's move on to integration. So integration is a way of having better communication with your printers. Now, for our users that connect to their printers from, say, Epson or Canon or HP Mamaki, any of those printers, Muto, etc., we've always had IP printing. We've always had IP printing. But we haven't had IP printing for EFI printers until just recently. So everyone with IP connectivity for your regular printers, you go, well, yeah, we've always been able to do that. What's the deal? Well, it's new for ViewTek and Fiery wide format printers, EFI wide format printers. And it's going to give you a lot of great benefits that kind of in the future, well, it's going to allow you to enable Fiery Navigator, which will be coming soon. It allows for MIS integration with digital storefront, and some future benefits. But what exactly does it do for you, maybe even right now? Well, it eliminates manual file import, and that's going to reduce your error. You can use workspaces, reduces the operator workflow. What this means is you can configure jobs from the Fiery XF, Fiery Pro Server client, and when that job appears on the ViewTek console, it's already configured to print. So all your operator has to do is worry about load media and hit print. They don't have to worry about going to the job ticket and setting everything. Well, maybe they want to do it for security, but it's just going to be a quick check to make sure everything is set right. And it can standardize repetitive tasks for consistent results, especially through the use of workspaces. You could have a workspace set up, say, for Tyvek, or a workspace for ABC Graphics. And then everybody printing for ABC Graphics, make sure it goes into that workspace. Well, then your operator, your press operator, just has to go to that workspace and bang, there's all the jobs for ABC Graphics that has to be gotten out. Or they load Tyvek on their output device. And then they go to the Tyvek workflow and bang, it's all there. Okay? It optimizes the printer workflow because you can kind of cluster all those jobs and get much more efficient. Another benefit, however, is communicating real-time job status. Normally, when we print, if you use file out, as soon as the file has been generated, your Fiery XF interface will show it's done, it's printed. Well, no, it's not. It might not be printed for a day or two, for all you know. You get real-time status update in the client if you use IP printing, so you know exactly whether a job is printed or not. And for some of the printers, it will return back to the interface, ink, media, usage, and printing time. And again, this can then be connected to Fiery Navigator that's going to be coming in the near future, and also to our MIS systems. Now, currently, we offer IP printing connectivity for these printers on the list. Okay, and when I said you get that status back, here is the status: submitting the job, submitted, waiting, printing, or printed. So you get this color-coded, text-based feedback right in the client anywhere in your network to know whether the jobs are actually printed or not. Okay? Let's take a look at the difference here. If I say file out for this particular printer, okay, there's my file out, and if I go to my special tab, I've got the special settings, clear printing. There's not much here. Now, here's IP printing. I've got this printer connected via IP network. Okay, I plugged in the IP address, hit connect, shows me that I'm connected, and now if I go to my special tab, look, I've got all of these new print options, and I can select any of these workspaces. Here's the workspace, John. So any jobs that I'm working on, maybe I send them there, or jobs for a particular customer, or for a particular look. Okay? And then I can set any of the options for that particular printer. Okay, the print direction, smoothing is on, whether there's curing, shutter mode, any of these I can set up on the job, and now my press operator doesn't have to worry about that. It can really save time on the press. And let's face it, you want to keep that thing and running nonstop. You want jobs, just flying out of there, and this can really help you to achieve that. Now, the levels of integration that we have. For many of our printers, you get the automatic job submission and the basic production, the feedback as to whether it's done or not. Some of the newer printers that we have, optimized cost and production tracking. You get that feedback on how much ink and media was used and how much time it took to actually print the job. In the future, there's going to be even more automation that we can add to your systems, especially in the areas of, say, tiling. So if you aren't taking advantage of IP printing with the ViewTech printers on the list and the wide format printers, give it a try, and we think you will be very happy with the results. Now, moving forward, we're going to be introducing Fiery Navigator. Fiery Navigator is a cloud-based system for data analysis, and the way that works is you connect, and I've got a beta version that I'm running here, and you see this little icon. This is the Fiery Navigator client that I could connect now my installation to. And once that happens, then what can happen is I can go into the cloud and go into Fiery Navigator anywhere I can access a web browser, and I can see here I've got Fiery XF. I can also monitor any Fiery devices, any toner devices I've got in my system. But I can check the current status. Here for all devices, I've got 8 devices. 2 of them are offline. In the Beijing facility, I've got 4 operating. 2 are offline. So these 2 that are offline are likely the 2 in Beijing. But I can see how much production was done, how much ink was used, how much media was used. I can see the waste and total of how many jobs are printed. And any of these I can click on and get a graphical representation of when any jobs were printed. Okay, I can see which jobs printed for, none were canceled, there 1 job was printed, and I can get a real good idea of productivity throughout my system. So Navigator is going to be really, really useful. If any of you would like to take advantage of the beta program for Navigator, please let us know in the chat window. Just type in your information that you'd like to be included in the beta, and we're going to compile a list of people to invite to the beta test. So if you'd like to take advantage of that, hey, just let us know. The last thing I'd like to cover is the resources we have, again, to make your life easier. We've got the documentation that we talked about earlier, help.efi.com, and of course we've got phone and email support. But something new is the Smart Support Knowledge Base. And here's the link, and again, you'll be getting this as part of your documentation. But what this is this website, EFI Smart Support. and I typed in the word profiles here and did a search, and I get a whole list of how to import media profiles, an error, how to download. You'll see we've kind of got both categories covered, how to do things and how come something's not working. Okay, can't open a profile in the profile inspector. So you're going to be able, and we update this constantly. We're regularly adding more details, more documentation, etc. So if you have a question, especially if it's after hours, you can go to this website and take a look at any of the knowledge articles that we have that hopefully will make your life easier. So what did we learn today? Well, we learned to use IP connectivity to enhance your EFI printer connectivity, something we've had for quite some time on our other printers we support, using presets and workspaces for anybody with any printer to simplify your system, either to simplify for your users or to keep areas that you haven't trained your staff on, keep them away from them so that they aren't able to kind of mess up jobs. I was working with a customer in London a couple of years ago. They did not use workspaces, and they had a new employee who was playing around in the interface on second shift, and to 7 24-inch wide inkjet printers accidentally turned off color management. And he ran all night nonstop to those 7 inkjet printers with no color management. They came in the next morning and realized all of that work had to be thrown away, and all that time and ink and media was lost. Workspaces would have prevented that from happening. Dynamic rendering intent to automatically use as much of the gamut of your output device as possible. Keep in mind that you would never use this in a proofing situation. This would be for production printing only. The dynamic wedge allows you to monitor especially spot colors. Very, very important in the FOGRA world and coming soon to the ID Alliance world to make sure that your documents conform to the new specifications. And hot folders and unit drivers to give your production people, your creative staff access to the system, but yet eliminating some of the interaction that has to be done with the staff running the production equipment. Automate that just a little bit. So hopefully you'll see that we've got a lot of things to make your life easier. Ellie, back to you.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much for a very detailed explanation and all of your tips. We also have a couple of session resources for our audience today. One is the X-Rite Complete Guide to Color Management, which gives a good foundation around color management. Always a very interesting document. Then we also have the help.efi.com, where there's a lot of information there. So whenever you have questions, do also take a look at that. And then we also have a technical video that John did around IP printing, specifically for Fiery Pro Server and Fiery XF. Next to that, we of course have all of the recorded World of Fiery sessions for wide format. We have a live link in the presentation that will be shared with you after the session. And do have a look there. We refer to a couple of webinars today in our session, and there's definitely a few more that would be worth your attention. Next to that, we have our next webinar coming up, which is September 13th, Getting Your Gray Balance in Check with G7, specifically going more into detail on how G7 can help you get a better color result, and registration is already open for that. We also always post new webinars on the webinar calendar, so do keep an eye on that. The moment we've got something open for registration, it will be there. And if you have certain topics that you would like to see covered in our sessions, then you can fill out your topic in a little bit more detail in the Have Your Say page. So that concludes our session for today.
All right. Sounds good. So we want to go through some of the questions. I'll give John and Ellie a minute to take a look at the questions that have been submitted. If you haven't had a chance yet to submit your question, this is the right time to do so. I want to remind everybody that we recorded today, so a link to the recording of today's session will be sent out to you early next week, along with a copy of this presentation, which, as John mentioned, will have live links to all the resources that both he and Ellie mentioned. So with that, let's get started with the questions. Ellie, which?
Yes, thank you. One question that we got is what are some ways or some easy ways to achieve a more consistent color across multiple different media, especially when they have different white points?
Okay, well, the prior webinar you're going to want to refer to, the one that we just finished, because a number of things were covered in that. But basically, you're looking at a couple of techniques. One would be to, of course, aim all the machines at the same reference profile. So let's say Fogra 52 or SWAP or Grackle, and then the system would automatically try to make the document look the same on all of those machines on those media. Now, the best way to help that accuracy improve is to have custom ICC profiles and or also possibly custom linearizations done for each of the combinations of printer ink media so that the system really knows exactly how the printer prints on that media. Now, if you have differences in white points, well, the only way to get the white point to match is to use absolute colorimetric. Some people don't like that because you get that kind of ghosting of extra ink to try to match the color. And, of course, you're making the best media look like, well, let's call it the worst media, or the media with the darkest white point. You can't make the darkest white point media look like the brightest white point. So you're always kind of looking at the lowest common denominator. We call it, the worst of the worst. Now, also, if you optimize, that will help improve the delta E values. There's also a technique, and again, it was covered in the last webinar, so take a look at that, where you optimize the printer with the smallest gamut, or actually it's the printer ink media with the smallest gamut, optimize that, and you use the results of the optimization to optimize the other printers. So you're actually aiming the capability of your other printers to the results of the worst printer. So take a look at the prior webinar, and hopefully that'll give you some ideas to go ahead.
Next question is, what do you do if the dynamic wedge fails the verification? What data set is the dynamic wedge being compared to?
Well, if it's the process colors, it's comparing to the reference profile on the color management panel. If it is spot colors defined as LAB values, it's looking to the library and it's looking at the LAB values for those spot colors. And then if you click the Optimize button, then it will use the comparison of the process colors to the reference and the spot colors to the library and build kind of a correction file. It's actually an LAB to LAB correction file to try to improve the values. Now, spot colors can be especially problematic because you might have spot colors that are just simply out of gamut. And no matter what you do, you're never going to get low delta E values. So please keep that in mind. We have a lot of customers that say, well, I optimized my output device to Fogra 39 or to SWAP, and I got really low delta E values. But now I have this incredibly saturated red that I tried to print, and I get high delta E values, and I expected to be able to optimize it and get the same low delta E values. Not necessarily. So just understand the gamut of the spot color library is far out of gamut to a lot of the printing media and ink combinations that we use.
Then a question about the UniDriver. Can you print with the UniDriver from Adobe Acrobat?
Yes, from anything that you, from any application you launch, you can print through that. Now, bear in mind, normally when you are working with Acrobat, you're working with PDF files, but whenever you print using UniDriver, it does generate a PostScript file, and the PostScript file would then go to the workflow and be picked up and processed, but it would be treated as a PostScript file. Color management techniques are ever so slightly different. And we have a document up on help.efi.com /FireEXF on color management in ProServer and FireEXF. Take a look at that document because it does show you the difference between PDF and PostScript color management processes.
Another one that came in around Unidriver is, would you advise to use the Unidriver over hot folders?
Well, in my world, every question ultimately can be the same answer, and the answer is always, well, that depends. And this is certainly one of those. It's what rights and privileges, what capability do you want to give to your users, and what kind of files do you want to work with? As I said, if you're using the Unidriver, you're making PostScript files. A lot of people like to make PDF files and simply drop it in the hot folder, and if it looks good, they can take that PDF file and archive it. They could send it to their plate setter, image setter, and actually print it once they made a proof. So there's really benefits to both. On the hot folder, you completely eliminate any interaction. It's all completely hands-off. Drop the file into that folder, and your operator, your creative application people don't have to worry about it. They just drop it in. But with the Unidriver, they get a little more capability, but they're dealing with PostScript instead of PDF. So you kind of have to look at each situation and what kind of files you want to deal with, what else you might want to do with the files, and again, how much control you want to give the people that are using either the hot folders or the Unidriver, and make your choice based on that.
All right, so we are a few minutes over. I know we have a few more questions, so Ellie, maybe one or two more, and we'll call it and get back to people individually if we missed anything.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, can dynamic wedge be used to verify Grackle as well?
Yeah, the dynamic wedge will use whatever reference profile you have selected. So it is no different. However, keep in mind, if you use the dynamic wedge, you're not using the official ID Alliance or the official Fulgura patch set. And you might get pushback from your customers if that's the only wedge you use to say that you verified to swap or Grackle. We can say, yes, we know it verified, and I know not only did these arbitrary colors that the ID Alliance or Fulgura come up with to verify against the specification, but the colors that are actually in the document are accurate. Now, some customers may be impressed with that, and some may be, well, I don't care. Where's my ID Alliance or my Fulgura wedge? That's why we do make it available that you could use two wedges. So it's not uncommon that customers will use the dynamic wedge for spot colors, and if they know they have to verify against one of the Fulgura standards or the ID Alliance standards, to use the appropriate wedge as wedge number 2 and use them both.
So the last question for today, can I share presets between users?
When you create presets, you said between users, so anyone who logs on can use the preset if they have the ability to access that particular panel. So if you remember, I set up John and I set up presets for color management. However, when I set up John's workspace, I did not give him access to the color management panel. So therefore, he would not have the rights to use those presets because he can't get to that panel to use them. If you want to share presets between copies of FireEXF, you would actually have to go into what we call the tickets folder. That's kind of an advanced feature. I would say you best contact your dealer or a consultant to try to share copies of presets between. They're actually very, very easy to build. So I would say rather than trying to share presets between machines, just rebuild them on each machine. But anyone on the machine, on that particular installation, will be able to use them if they have access to those panels.
All right, so as always, a session chock full of information. We do have a few more questions, and I do apologize to those attendees that we are unable to get to your questions today. We are a little over, want to respect everybody's time, so we will get back to you individually to address your question. With that, I want to thank everyone for attending, and of course, thank John and Ellie for putting together a great presentation today. As a reminder, we have our next session in September. Registrations are already open and available to you, so go ahead and do that. And for all of you who expressed interest in the Navigator beta, we will be in contact with you in the coming days with more details, and look forward to a great beta there. So with that, thanks everyone again. We'll see you on the next one. Take care.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. We appreciate it. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.